knowing that you are always there for us. We pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. You might have noticed that the one-word title for this morning's sermon is alone. Alone. I don't know. Okay, yeah. I'm not seeing it here, so you're seeing it there. We're good. All right. But we'll go ahead. I already hit the button, so we might as well ask that question. Have you been there? I'm not asking for a show of hands this morning, but have you ever felt alone? It is a plague in our culture. If you look at the statistics, and there is a lot of research, a lot of numbers, a lot of medical studies. I'm not going to give a whole lot of that today. This is not a medical lecture or a statistical study, but it is increasing. Not only is it very common for people to feel lonely. Loneliness is not only is it common and has been for a long time, but just in the United States, and you could go global and it's about the same, it has been increasing. And it isn't just about 2020 and isolation and people becoming less sociable because of that. It actually started before that. If anything, the last 2 or 3 years has stoked that fire a bit more. But people are alone. People are lonely. It's been said that we are more connected than ever before as a people, as humanity. We can travel faster and farther than ever before with simply opening up, and maybe it might be on our wrist, or it's still in our pocket, or it might even be other places around us and even on our bodies, but from hundreds of ways, from a text to a phone call to Instagram or Facebook Messenger and all the other chatting forums out there, we can communicate and stay connected more ways and in greater ways than ever before. But it's also been said that we are lonelier than ever before. Here's how one author puts it, and I'm going to use my phone to read it to you. How about that? But he says, we are lonely but fearful of intimacy. Digital connections and the sociable robot may offer the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. Our networked life allows us to hide from each other even as we are tethered to each other. Lonely, being alone. Now, I get that there are some of us that we kind of like our alone time. Maybe everybody does to some degree. It might be the morning time, and if I haven't had my coffee yet, some people, they just say, don't say anything to them. They're not going to talk to you, or if they do talk, you're not going to enjoy the conversation until a certain time of day, right? I mean, I get that. There's a place even for spiritual solitude, to just spend time with God, but you're still not alone. But as a whole, as humanity, God doesn't want us to be alone. God doesn't want humanity to be isolated, at least not for too long or too much. And let's think about that some more together. Is it true that God created us as people to be around other people? Even though sometimes we get to thinking, maybe that's the problem. I don't want to be with people. People are the people problems, right? That isn't God's intention. And I think if we look at it, think about it, it isn't something that we really want as well. So let's look at 3 things this morning. Let's look a little more at the idea of being alone. Let's look at some biblical passages that they look at the danger even of isolation as a people that God made. And then the reality of better together. That it is better to be with other people, especially our family in Jesus. And then we'll close by considering the fact that Jesus changes things. Jesus changes things. Here's the first one then. Being alone. And I got to make sure I'm in sync here. Okay, all right. We'll get started. Being alone. You can look at this one, but it's one that we can more reference. In Genesis chapter 2, after God has created the first human, Genesis 1 has him creating male and female. He creates humanity. But Genesis 2, that takes us back into a more focused, highlighted look at creation, shows us that God creates the human, Adam, one man first. And then, after he has convinced Adam, God makes the statement, here's the reality about humanity, that it is, quote, not good for man to be, and there's our word, alone. And for this context, it works in both ways. That it is not good for the man, for Adam himself, to be alone. He needs Eve. But it's also true for mankind, for humanity. That God created within us an innate need for companionship, for people. Now, some of us aren't as big on maybe touch, and we're not, what do we say? We're not huggers, and others, oh yes, we're huggers, or all of that. And so you get some of those nuances, and that also is beyond the scope of real looking into in great depth today. So realizing there are some differences and some unique things about our personalities, but it's still true that every human being is created by God to be with, to be around, to interact with, to connect with, to get close to. Say it however you want. The point is, God didn't create us to be alone. Being alone is harmful. If it goes too far, it's harmful. Here's where you could say, here's what God said, here's the Creator, and then the medical field is catching up. And I don't know exactly of all the exactness of this, and that's a lot of exact. But some medical professionals have said that loneliness, when it becomes a lengthy reality in my life, that loneliness is as harmful to mental and physical health. This is just those two. You can then tack on spiritual, but they're dealing with what they consider health here. That it's as harmful to my health as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, or consuming large quantities of alcohol. Or another said it this way, that it is twice as detrimental to physical and mental health on a human being as obesity, loneliness. No wonder God said, almost from the beginning in Genesis 2, that's not good for us to be alone. And if you've ever been there, and if you're very old at all, you have been at one point in your life where you felt alone, and it might be that you were surrounded by people. Been there? We memorialize it in songs and poems where you're standing in a crowded room and you feel all alone. Or it might be in a more obvious way that you are isolated very physically alone. Whether that's by your own choice or circumstances, not good. Let's turn together now and read from Proverbs chapter 18. Proverbs 18, the first two verses. The proverb writer, inspired in writing this wisdom, Solomon says, it's dangerous. Proverbs 18, the first two verses. He writes here, Proverbs 18:1, whoever isolates himself, so here is a choice, a decision, seeks his own desire. And you might think of how that could work itself out in practical terms. Or it might be too much emphasis on my own privacy, too much emphasis on a certain sense of security that comes from backing away from other people. And as we put these together, we think about Genesis 2, and we think about Proverbs 18, and this applies to our physical family, our earthly family. This can apply to spouses. Is it possible to be married to someone, live in the same house, and be lonely? It happens every day. He says, he who isolates himself, he or she for that matter, he breaks out against all sound judgment. This could be on both sides of this, that he's saying it's not a good idea to isolate oneself. It actually doesn't make sense in the big picture. But it's also true that when I do this, when I cut myself off from the wisdom of others, perhaps the support of others when I fall down, that I am less likely to make wise decisions. I'm more likely, as he says, to go against sound judgment or wise thinking when I've cut myself off from the ties and connections with other people. And you might think about someone that begins to isolate themselves from their church family and the effects that can have on their spiritual health. And then verse 2 of Proverbs 18, he says this, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. How might that reflect back to the previous two statements, the previous verse? He who isolates himself does so here for selfish reasons. There's a lack of judgment. And in the very next verse, he says, the fool, he only wants to hear himself. He only wants his own thoughts. And we like to start with the assumption that whatever we think, any thought we have, is right. And if somebody else says something different, well, they've got their right to be wrong. And here's an isolation where it's dangerous because you lose the grounding of other ideas and thoughts, perhaps even some things that might pull us back from decisions that we shouldn't make. And that group here, not a group mentality and decision making or anything like that, but an environment where we can seek and find wisdom. Perhaps from those who've been there and done that even. But the overarching principle here is that it is not good, it is even dangerous to isolate ourselves. I think about 1 Corinthians chapter 10 when Paul describes the dangers of temptation in verse 13 in the surrounding context. And it's 1 Corinthians 10 verse 12 where you have that declaration. Whoever thinks they stand had better be careful. Take heed is the older language there. Be careful. Watch yourself lest you fall. With a focus and a desire to isolate can come also a false sense of security. It is when I am alone, it is when I spend lots of time alone, if I'm not careful, that there can be a greater temptation. The bad habits I already have, the addictions I may have, all of that is intensified. Consider the predator and prey. Consider the predator that looks for, and most of them do, they watch for the isolated animal. They're often hunting herd animals, right? Whether it's the lion or the cheetah. And they not only look for the weak one, the slow one, but partly involved with that, they look for the one that's alone, the isolated one. Do you think that is there anything that Satan might like more than a Christian who's all alone? Let's read from Judges chapter 18 before we look at the other side of this. I want you to remember this morning, and that's part of why I chose that as the blank to fill in. I want you to remember the city of Laish. 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 Judges 18 is where we read about this city. We're going to read a few different verses. There's more than one example of the pitfalls of isolation in this chapter. So if you have some time on your own later, you might take a look at more of this chapter. But we're going to read a few verses from this chapter. This chapter involves the tribe of Dan. This is the group of people that were a part of Israel that came from the man named Dan, the Danites. And they're looking for more inheritance, more land. and they discover the people. They're from Sidon, the people of Laish. Judges 18. Let's look at verse 7 together. These are 5 men from Dan. It says, "Then the 5 men departed and came to Laish, and saw the people who were there, how they lived in security, after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and unsuspecting, lacking nothing that is in the earth, and possessing wealth." They had everything they needed. They didn't need anybody else. And even today, this area where the ancient city of Laish was, it's still a very fertile, very beautiful place. It's a great place to live, but it's isolated. And then it says this, possessing wealth, and how they were far from the Sidonians, the rest of their people, and had no dealings with anyone. And then, if you keep reading this chapter, that is why the people of Dan were able to easily take the city. They had no reinforcements coming, no allies, no trade dealings. They were geographically isolated and separate from even their own people. And they were easily defeated because of the dangers of isolation, false security, and thinking to yourself, we're good. I don't need anything or anyone. I'll just be alone. Being alone is not something that God wants. And sometimes this could be on the other side, the community, the family, to look out for those that are ostracized and desolate and isolated. But it can also be on us to seek connection with people, with God's people for sure. Let's take a look at that. We see being alone and some of the dangers that come with that. We've experienced it in some way or another. But now, the positive side, that we're better together. Better together. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 reminds us of the power of 2 over 1. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. Let's turn and read that one together. Here, as Solomon now again explores different parts of life, as he looks to learn the lessons that this world and this earthly life has to offer, here's one of those that he presents to us in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 and following. He says, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. Look at what you can get done when you work together. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone, when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. How can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. A 3-fold cord is not quickly broken. We see a number of pictures and illustrations from the text here even itself in Ecclesiastes. One thing I consider is how this works within the body of Jesus. I've seen it, haven't you? When someone does fall down, whether that's something that happens in their life, a loss of a family member, the loss of a job, the loss of their health. And there are those who are there to support them and uphold them, pray for them, bring them food, visit them, just call and say, I just called to check on you. How you doing today? Or when you come together, whether that's on a Sunday or a Wednesday or other times when we gather to do things together. And there's something about just seeing another face of another person who loves Jesus like you do. And to shake their hand, to give them a hug, to catch up. There's this strength that comes. Like Solomon says here, when you fall down, for somebody to be there with a hand out to pick you up. Now let's turn now to the New Covenant scriptures from Ecclesiastes. Here's how Paul puts it in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. This whole chapter reminds us of who we are, that we are not just individuals who were saved by Jesus, that even when that happened, we were made part of a body of people. That we're now Jesus' body, put together for a reason. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, we'll begin reading at verse 14, and we will drop down eventually to verse 25. He says, "The body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body." Verse 17, "If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each of them as He chose." And as you read this, he's bridging between the two. He tends to go back and forth in this chapter between looking at the idea of the actual human body and our anatomy, and then the body of people. The members, we even take that word, members of the church, as one body. So think about verse 19 again, that God has done this for a reason. There's a reason that we all aren't alike. There's a reason that the people of Jesus are meant to come from mixed backgrounds and different personalities, different abilities, different things that each of us have. But that is the case, that each of us, every person in this room, has something that they can contribute to this work, to the life and health of the body of the church. Look at the next verse, verse 20. Or I said 19, I meant 18, okay? So look at 19. "If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yes, yet one body." So have you found your place in the body of Jesus, in the church of Jesus? That might fall on us as a whole to be one that, to be a group of people who are open and welcoming, who are helping others to find their role and their work. If nothing else, just to be an encouraging presence. Or it might fall on me to be on my end of things, to be someone who's willing to participate. That being a part of the church isn't meant to just be that checklist where you sit in a pew and you put some money in a metal plate and that's church. No. The church is meant to be a body of people who love and support and care for each other like a, what's that word? A family. Family. And I've had people tell me, people who didn't really have any other earthly family, whether because of loss or other things that have happened, and it just emphasized for them even more the value of having their church family. Two more verses here. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 25 and 26. He's talking about how God has put together the body in a way that works and is efficient. And so he says in verse 25 that there may be no division in the body. Could we say today, no isolation, no separation, but that the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. There's something to be said for being a part of the body, the people of Jesus. And then, I guess we could say this is a bit more homework, but I encourage you today to take some time this week and read the letter that Paul writes to the Ephesians, the letter we call Ephesians. It's not that long. We divide it into 6 chapters. You can read it in just a few minutes. But I encourage you not just to read it, but to notice the emphasis on unity. Why does that matter? And the emphasis on the church. When Paul and the other writers write about Christians, yes, each individual is valuable and important, but the emphasis, the focus is always on the church. There's a reason we have terms like that, church and body, and it's not just the individuals who are saved. And as we think about our culture, we're still in this Western culture where individualism is king. And that has some pros, but it has maybe more harmful effects, where we get so self-sufficient in our thinking. And it's all about the individual and personal salvation. That's all that matters, is I get saved and I go to heaven. Well, who do you think you're going to be with in heaven? The emphasis in the Bible is always on the group of Christians who love each other, worship together, but worshiping together is often, in the first century church, just the beginning of being together. Be it better together. So there's a comfort here, better together. There's an appreciation here to look and not take for granted that support system. But then there's also a challenge here today. Based upon knowing that and being reminded of what that looks like and what that means, to be a part of that support. What does he say here? That if one suffers, one is honored, that they all support or care for one another. Better together. We see being alone, and that's even more of why it is better to be together. Now let's look at Jesus himself. Jesus changes things. Jesus makes it possible that we don't ever have to be alone. Let's read two examples, and the sermon will be ours. One is in Mark chapter 1. Human touch. First chapter of Mark, near the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and we see a Savior who has come to touch the untouchable, to reach those that if anyone has a reason that they feel alone and isolated, that he calls them to himself. Mark chapter 1, verse 40 says that a leper came to him. Now, we read that so quickly and so lightly. But this is a guy that has spent who knows how long at this point in his life almost totally alone. If he had anybody around him, it would have been other lepers. And his family and his friends, let's say in our terms, his church family, he doesn't have any contact with anybody. And they see him coming and he has to announce his presence and they run. Have you ever been there where you just show up somewhere and people start running? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. He has. A leper imploring him and kneeling said to him, "If you will, you can make me clean. You can make me whole again. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. Jesus can change things." And so, moved with pity or compassion, he said some words of healing from a distance. Is that what your Bible says? Well, that's not actually what mine says either. And I don't know how close the leper came. I wouldn't be surprised, given this context, that the leper, the kneeling and imploring he does is from a distance. And so in between the lines there, between 40 and 41, before Jesus stretches out his hand, Jesus takes some steps. And you can hear the gasp from the disciples and anyone else watching. I can imagine Peter, maybe he's the guy, if he's there, reaching out to grab Jesus and say, whoa. But Mark 1:41 says, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, I will be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. A man desperate for human touch. Can you imagine what a simple hand meant to that man? And then in Matthew chapter 9, we turn back to Matthew and we read 3 more verses here. Matthew 9, 20 through 22. Jesus is making his way to resurrect a dead 12-year-old girl. And as he's traveling with her father and the group to go to her home to bring her back to life, this happens. Matthew chapter 9, verse 20. Behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. And here's where that more of those in between the lines come in. This is a woman who has spent everything she has financially and has only become worse. This is a woman who is ostracized from society. She can't worship with God's people. She can't do anything that she would normally do. And she comes to Jesus. If only I touch his garment, I will be made well. Now, if you read the other gospel parallels, there's some more that happens here with Jesus finding out, in a sense. Not that he didn't already know. But Jesus turned and seeing her said, take heart, daughter. Your faith has made you well. Jesus changes things. Jesus takes the lonely and welcomes them. The question for me today, am I following his example in reaching out and welcoming the lonely and ostracized in my society? We see this morning being alone isn't a good thing overall. It may have its place here and there for various reasons and for various people. Better, always better, as a whole, together. Because Jesus changes things. Because it's only with Jesus that people who don't like each other, people who, yes, have very different opinions, can come together and serve Jesus and serve each other. Because from a certain standpoint, hypothetically, sure, you could be a faithful Christian stranded on a deserted island. But you'd be missing something. And a huge component of what it means to be a Christian, serving others, and yes, being served and encouraged, would be gone. Now we're going to sing a song of encouragement this morning, to encourage all of us, whether we're not a Christian and it's our day to become a Christian, to be immersed in the blood of Jesus, or as Christians, to be reminded and encouraged today that we don't have to be alone. The height of punishment in a prison is total isolation. I've been inside. It was not the full, total lockdown prison isolation, but I've been inside an isolation cell in a local jail. I wasn't the inmate. I better clarify that. But I remember sitting with the man in there. And it was the first actual conversation he had had in weeks. There's a reason that that's the height of punishment. But because of Jesus, not only do we get to be with him and with his people here, but one of the big promises of being a Christian is that I get to be with Jesus and Jesus' people forever. And because of Jesus, I will never be alone. As we stand and sing together.